Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a subject so vast, so ancient, it's almost too big to wrap your head around.
It really is.
The entire history of India. We're talking about a journey across, 30,000 years, from the earliest nomads to a global power of over 1 billion people.
Exactly. And this isn't just a list of kings and dates. This is a deep dive into some of the world's first cities, philosophies that changed the globe, and empires that weathered, just about everything.
Right, from Alexander the Great showing up at the border to European colonial.
Saw it all.
So our mission today is ambitious, but I think it's essential. We want to pull out the key insights from this immense history. The goal isn't to memorize every battle.
No, not at all.
It's to build a foundation so you can understand India's position in the world today. Its internal tensions, its future prospects, all starts here.
Precisely. And the sources we're drawing from are incredibly comprehensive. Political, cultural, military history. It all comes together to give us that panoramic, deep perspective. You have to go way back to make sense of the present.
Okay, so let's do it. Where do we begin? Before writing, before cities even. When we think ancient India, I feel like our minds immediately jump to these amazing planned cities. But the human story here goes back so much further.
Oh, exponentially further. Our sources talk about the Adivasi, the ancient native people. They were living on the subcontinent for up to 30,000.
30,000. That timeline it dwarfs ancient Rome or even Egypt.
It absolutely does. And for most of that time, they were nomads, semi-nomads, living and encamping long before anyone thought of building.
And the challenge for us as historians is that their history is mostly oral tradition, right?
Exactly. Which is both crucial and honestly a bit tragic. They didn't leave behind giant stone monuments or written records, so their story survives mainly through the cultural practices of their descendants.
So there's very little hard archaeological evidence to go on. It's a reminder that history isn't just what's carved in stone.
A power. But then around the late 4th millennium BC, you get this total game, the emergence of the first great settled urban society.
The Indus River Valley Civilization, the IRVC.
Yep. An urban culture that thrived for 2,000 years, hitting its peak around 2600 BC.
And this is where we see one of India's first wow moments for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, Mesopotamia and Egypt were building big things, sure. But the IRVC cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, the level of planning is just astounding.
It's a marvel of engineering. These weren't just messy, sprawling cities. They were laid out on a grid. Complex settlements with high-quality brick architecture and, incredibly advanced infrastructure.
It speaks to some kind of strong central authority, doesn't it? Someone was making these decisions for the public good.
Absolutely.
I was just floored by the details on their municipal services, the sophisticated gravity-fed sewage systems, the huge public bath. Our sources say nothing like them would be built anywhere else in the world for over 1,000 years.
Not in Rome. Not in Greece. Nowhere.
Was that about hygiene or was it religious?
Probably both. The focus on ritual bathing suggests a religious component, but the sheer uniformity of the design across hundreds of miles, that points to a very organized, centralized body focused on public health and order.
And we know they were traders, too.
A developed merchant culture. We have their seals, which they use for trade, and we can see that entry and exit to the towns were tightly controlled. The graves even show a clear, wealth-based social hierarchy.
But then we hit the wall. The great mystery. Despite all this organization, all these people, maybe 5 million at its peak, we can't read their writing.
And that is the defining tragedy of the IRV. Unlike Egypt or China, we lost the Indus. So for 2,000 years of history, with hundreds of sites, we can't access their myths, their beliefs, their politics.
We can't name a single person.
Not one. In 2 millennia. It's a massive blank spot right at the foundation of the subcontinent.
So what happened to them? It wasn't a sudden collapse or an invasion, was it?
No, the evidence points to a much more gradual decline. It sort of peters out between 1900 and 1300.
And the main theory is climate change.
Overwhelmingly. Yes, the climate got cooler and drier after about 1800 BC, and that would have devastated the monsoon agriculture they needed to feed those huge cities.
On top of that, earthquakes shifted the course of the Indus River.
Right, cutting off the water supply to some of their biggest centers.
So people themselves, they didn't just...
No, scholars believe they migrated, mostly southeast, deeper into the subcontinent. And this is the leading theory for how the Dravidian language family, that's Telugu, Tamil, Canada, got established in southern India.
So there's this deep, powerful connection between that lost northern civilization and the linguistic roots of the South today.
Exactly.
Okay, so with the IRVC in decline, we get the next major wave of people, the Vedic people.
Sometimes called the Indo-Aryans, yes. They start migrating from Central Asia around 1500 BC. They call themselves the Arya.
And they bring two transformative things with them.
Two huge things. First, the domesticated horse, which they use for migration, and crucially for pulling these fast, lightweight chariots that redefined warfare.
And second, their language.
Vedic Sanskrit, the language that becomes the conduit for the entire spiritual bedrock of India, the Vedas.
Right. The four Vedas, with the Rig Veda being the oldest and composed around 1500 BC.
And these are not simple texts. They're incredibly complex, dense religious and ritual texts that form the absolute foundation of philosophy.
And at first, these Vedic people were semi-nomadic, right? Herders, mostly?
Yes, concentrated in the Punjab in the northwest. But their lifestyle changed dramatically as they moved deeper into the subcontinent.
What enabled that expansion?
The mastery of ironworking after 1200 BC. That was iron tools let them clear the dense forests and jungles that covered so much of the continent.
So they could finally abandon the nomadic life for permanence.
Exactly. And as society gets more settled and complex, their social structure formalized, well, into one of the most enduring and contentious systems in the world.
The Varna, the basis for what later becomes the caste.
That's right. It's all laid out in the Purusha Sukta of the Rig Veda, using this powerful analogy of the human body to define everyone's role.
At the top, you have the head, the Brahmins.
The priests and scholars. They're responsible for the sacred text, for education. They hold the spiritual authority.
Then the hands and arms of the body, the Kshatriyas.
Your warriors, your kings, your nobles, your administrators, the governing class. It shows that deep traditional link between power and military might.
Below them, the thighs, or the Vaishya.
The wealth generators, landowning farmers, merchants, businessmen, the economic engine of the society.
And finally, the feet that the whole body stands, Shudra.
The laborers, the peasants, the vast majority of the population whose job was explicitly to serve the other. This social hierarchy, born in the Vedic era, would provide a kind of rigid stability for millennia, even as empires rose and fell.
Now, before we move into those empires, we have to touch on the regional diversity. Our sources mention the Jorwe culture in the Deccan Plateau.
A very important point. Indian history is never monolithic. The Jorwe culture, down in Maharashtra, existed from about 1400 to 700 BC, at the same time the Vedic world was developing up north.
And they had strange archaeological quirks.
Very strange. Unsettling. In many of their burials, the bodies had their feet intentionally cut off before being buried. And we have artifacts that show their deities as being headless.
We don't know why, do we?
We don't. But it's a powerful reminder that while one story was unfolding in the north, completely different, unique cultures were developing in parallel all over the subcontinent. It's a history of many different stories happening at once.
So after about 1,000 years, that Vedic period gives way to a new era around the 7th century, and it's marked by a return to big cities.
Right. For the first time since the IRVC declined, we see large, politically important cities reemerging. This is the age of the Janapadas.
Which then consolidate into the 16 Mahajanapada kingdoms, minor empires, places like Magadha and Kuru.
And crucially, these cities created the wealth and the intellectual environment for a revolutionary period of spiritual development.
An intellectual crucible that gives birth to global faith. We're talking Jainism and Buddhism.
Two of the big ones, yes. Let's start with Jainism, which comes out of the teachings of Mahavira in the 6th century BC.
He was a prince, originally.
He was a prince in eastern India who gave it all up at age 30 to pursue this incredibly disciplined ascetic life. After 12 years of meditation, he achieves what's called Kevaljnana transcendence. He becomes a Tirthankara, a ford maker, someone who creates a path for others to escape the cycle of rebirth, or samsara.
And the core tenet of Jainism is ahimsa, total nonviolence.
Total. It's symbolized by that open palm, and it extends to every living being, even the smallest insects. It's incredibly...
And followers take 5 vows: truth, non-stealing, chastity, avoiding greed, and that all-encompassing nonviolence.
Then, at the same time, you have Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama. His story is almost a cultural critique. He's raised in this bubble of absolute luxury, totally shielded from any knowledge of suffering.
Until his aha moment, the 4 encounters.
Right. He sees an old man, a sick man, and a dead body, and it shatters his worldview. He realizes that suffering, old age, disease, death is universal and unavoidable.
But then he sees the 4th person, an ascetic monk, and realizes there might be a way out.
Exactly. So he first tries extreme self-denial, but finds he eventually achieves nirvana through meditation under the Bodhi, and his philosophy is built around the 4 nobles and the 8 path.
But he advocates for the middle path.
A crucial concept, a pragmatic balance between extreme indulgence and extreme self-denial. It made his philosophy accessible to everyone, not just monks who could dedicate their whole lives to asceticism.
And it's interesting how both faiths, even as they critique the Vedic world, they still share those core Indian ideas of karma.
They do, which would later become foundational to modern as well.
Okay, let's pivot from philosophy to politics. Of all those Mahajanapada, the kingdom of Magadha becomes the cradle of India's first great empire. Why there?
It was pure geography, a perfect storm of advantages. The land was ideal for growing rice, which meant huge, reliable food service.
Which means a stable tax base and enough food to support a large army.
A very large army. Plus, they had great access to iron for weapons and tools, and uniquely, the area was home to vast numbers of wild,
Which they turned into the tanks of the ancient world.
They really did. War elephants gave the Magadhan armies a critical military edge that no one else had.
The early Haryanka dynasty in Magadha used that edge, but their history is so dramatic. The story of King Bimbisara being killed by his own son,
Ajatashatru, who then feels immense regret, becomes a follower of. It's an incredible story. That dynasty eventually gives way to the short-lived but powerful Nanda dynasty, 345.
who were important mainly because they were in charge when a certain famous conqueror arrived.
Exactly, Alexander the Great. In 326 BC, after conquering Persia, he marches into the Punjab.
Where he has that famous encounter with King Porus at the Hydaspes River.
Right. And Porus fights so fiercely with his elephants that Alexander's genuinely impressed. He spares him, even allies with him, hoping to push further.
But his army has other ideas.
The campaign just stops. At the Hyphasis River, his exhausted troops essentially knew. They had heard rumors, accurate rumors, of the massive Nanda Empire that was waiting for them.
An army of, 200,000 men?
And thousands of those terrifying war elephants, Alexander's men just said, war.
So Alexander turns back, leaving this massive power vacuum in his wake, which is the perfect opportunity for the rise of the Mauryan Empire.
The perfect opportunity. Founded by Chandragupta Maurya in 320 BC, who just sweeps in and overthrows the Nanda Empire.
Possibly with the help of his famous advisor, Kautilya.
His spy master, right. And Chandragupta then turns his attention west and defeats Alexander's successor, the Seleucid Empire.
It's one of history's great undocumented wars. We just know that Chandragupta won, gaining territory all the way into modern Afghanistan.
In exchange for 500 war elephants. Pretty good trade.
And his capital, Pataliputra, was meant to be incredible. The Greek ambassador Megasthenes wrote about it.
He described a city with 21 miles of walls, 600 towers, 60 gates. Imagine being him coming from the Greek world and seeing a city on that scale. It must have been awe-inspiring.
Now, this centralized empire hits its absolute peak under Chandragupta's grandson, Ashoka the Great.
Ashoka starts his reign like any other king with military conquest. He leads the devastating Kalinga War, which results in maybe 250,000 deaths.
But the scale of the destruction just horrifies him.
It leads to his famous transformation. After 261 BC, Ashoka swears off war completely and dedicates himself to Buddhism and the principle of nonviolence.
So his legacy isn't really about battles, it's about his moral governance.
It is. He carves these edicts on stone pillars all across his empire, confessing his past sins and explaining his atonement building, digging wells, planting trees for travel. It's an unprecedented example of a ruler motivated by ethical change.
But that model, it seems, wasn't sustainable.
No. The empire was just too big, and a nonviolent policy made it hard to manage. It fragmented very quickly after Ashoka died, not helped by court drama like his wife's supposed successor.
And the centralized Mauryan model, while amazing for a time, just proved too brittle for India's diversity.
Exactly. The next 500 years see a lot of fragmentation, foreign incursions from Greeks, Scythians, Kushan, but this was mainly a dark age for the north.
Right, because in the Deccan, the Satavahana dynasty was flourishing.
For about 400 years, they were a huge, stable state controlling key trade routes to the Roman Empire.
And even further south, in Taubal country, you had the three Muventar dynasty, where women seemed to have a higher status than in the north.
All of which leads us to what many people call the most celebrated period in India.
The Gupta Golden Age, 4th to 6th century CE.
Right, and the Guptas learned from the Mauryan collapse. They pioneered a much more pragmatic, decentralized model of empire.
So instead of trying to control everything directly,
they had direct control over the core region, but let regional rulers keep a lot of autonomy as long as they swore loyalty and paid tribute. It was a much better fit for.
And this period really earns the name Golden Age because of the peace, the prosperity, and the incredible intellectual innovation.
You have institutions like the Nalanda Mahavihara, this massive Buddhist center of learning, patronized even by non-Buddhists. They studied everything: Vedas, medicine, logic.
And the scientific breakthroughs were just world-changing.
Absolutely. You have Aryabhata in the 5th century correctly figuring out how eclipses work and that the Earth rotates on its axis. He calculated pi to 3.1416 and developed early versions of sine and cosine.
And crucially, another scholar, Verhomihura, is the earliest we have who represents 0 as both a symbol and a number.
Perfecting a concept that is foundational to all of modern mathematics.
The Guptas were also the first major Hindu empire, right?
Yes, and this is when Hinduism really reaches a cultural zenith. They promoted Sanskrit, built the first grand stone temples, and codified many texts. You see the main deities unified in the Trimurti Brahma, the creator, Shiva, the destroyer, and Vishnu, the preserver.
And the Guptas particularly championed Vishnu.
They did. But most importantly, This is the period when the great Sanskrit epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, reached their modern form.
And these are more than just stories.
Oh, they're foundational cultural documents. The Mahabharata alone is several times longer than Homer's works combined, longer than the Bible and the Quran put together. These stories became the cultural glue that helped unify India, even when it was politically divided.
But we have to challenge that term golden. It wasn't golden for everyone, was it? The status of women declined sharply.
That's a critical point. While a visiting Chinese monk, Fa Xian, praised the charity and hospitals for the poor, you're right, women lost autonomy. They were restricted from public life, lost the right to study the Vedas, and this new belief emerged that a woman could only achieve spiritual liberation by being reborn as a man.
And the normalization of sati widow burning, just a horrifying regression.
It is. This complex, contradictory social reality is also the context for another famous Gupta-era text, the Kama.
Which has a reputation that is completely misleading.
Completely. A tiny part of it is about most of it is a detailed guide to household management, social etiquette, and the philosophy of pleasure within a loving, stable. It's really a manual for virtuous domestic.
So like all the others, the Gupta Empire eventually fell.
It did. Their decentralized model became their weakness. Powerful regional rulers started to break away, and foreign invaders, the Huns, chipped away at the edge. The central authority just never. India returned to fragment.
Okay, so after the Guptas collapse, northern India does see a brief return to unity under King Harsha.
Right, from 606 to 647. Harsha was a really dynamic ruler, a great military strategist, but also known for being a peaceful, tolerant governor.
And he was an itinerant emperor. He traveled his kingdom to solve problems.
He did, which was unique. We know a lot about him thanks to his biographer, Banapada, and the writings of the Chinese Xuanzang, who praised.
But his expansion south was stopped cold.
By the Chalukya Empire in the Deccan, led by the warrior king Pulakeshin II, he was a powerhouse. He defeated Harsha at the Battle of Mada.
And he's also famous for a major early encounter between Indian and Islamic powers.
A critical moment. In 636 CE, Pulakeshin's navy successfully repelled an Arab fleet sent by the Caliph Umar. It was a major victory that showed Indian powers could check the rapid expansion.
Meanwhile, back in the north, you have this long, bitter conflict called the tripartite struggle.
Right, the Kannauj Triangle War. Basically, three empires, the Pratiharas, the Rashtrakutas, and the Palace, all fighting for control of northern India for about 100.
And their different relationships with the Islamic world are really telling, aren't they?
Very. The Pratiharas in Gujarat were fierce military opponents. Arab chroniclers called their emperor one of the greatest foes.
But the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan were the total opposite.
Complete. They were highly tolerant, welcomed Muslim traders and communities, allowed mosques to be built.
And the Palace in Bengal were the last major Buddhist power, focused more on diplomacy and scholarship. It shows the interaction wasn't just about conflict.
Exactly. Trade, cooperation, pragmatism, it was all parts.
Okay, so now let's go south. The Chola Empire rises, and they are unique because they don't just unify the south.
They build a foreign maritime empire, one of the only Indian powers ever to do so. The Cholas were a genuine global superpower of their time.
Under Raja Harkar, they conquer Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and his son, Rajendra I, goes even further.
He conquers territory in the Malay archipelago, Sumatra, Thailand. He takes the title Gangai Kondakola, the Chola who conquered the Ganga.
Their navy was so dominant that the sources call the Bay of Bengal a Chola lake.
It basically was. They had this massive navy funded by extensive trade from China to Egypt. And that wealth let them build these enormous temples.
Which weren't just religious centers.
No, they were expressions of political power. They were economic hubs, tax collection points, centers for local government. They were the glue that held the empire.
But while the south is solidifying under the Cholas, the north faces a decisive new threat.
The first major Islamic incursions came from Mahmud of Ghazni in the early 11th century, who was famous for raiding temple wealth.
But the real shift to political rule begins with Muhammad of Ghor.
Right. He launches a full invasion in 1191. After he's assassinated, his former slave and general, Qutbuddin Aibak, establishes the Delhi Sultanate in 1206.
And this is the beginning of continuous Muslim rule from Delhi for the next 300 years.
5 different dynasties, all ruling from Delhi. Slave dynasty had to deal with Mongol raid. Then you get the Khilji dynasty.
And one of India's most brutal tyrants, Alauddin Khilji.
Notorious for his paranoia and violence, he massacred 30,000 Mongol Muslim converts because he feared they might rebel.
The Tughlaq dynasty that followed was also incredibly unstable.
Disastrous military campaign, heavy discrimination against Hindus. They basically bankrupted the state, leading to famine and collapse.
And as the Tughlaqs weaken, two major rival powers emerge in the Deccan.
Right along the Krishna River border, you have the Muslim Bahmani Sultanate in the north and the Hindu Vijayanagara Empire in the south.
The Bahmani were interesting, a Muslim aristocracy, but tolerant of Hindus, and they may have been the first to use gunpowder weapons on the subcontinent.
And their rivalry with Vijayanagara gives us that incredible story from 1406, the War of the Goldsmith's Daughter,
Where the Hindu ruler tries to abduct a girl who rejects.
fearing she'd have to commit sati. So she flees to the Bahmani Sultan, which starts a huge war. The Sultan wins, demands the Hindu ruler's daughter as tribute, and marries the goldsmith's daughter to his own son.
It's such a vivid story of how social, custom, religion, and military power were all tangled up.
A perfect example. The Delhi Sultanate finally gets its death blow in 1398 when Timur, or Tamerlane, invades and just brutally sacks Delhi, crippling the city for a century. Both Vijayanagara and Bahmani eventually collapse, which sets the stage for the next great dynasty.
And that next great dynasty arrives in the 16th century, the Mughals, sweeping in from Central Asia.
Led by Babur, who claimed descent from both Genghis Khan and Timur, a prestigious lineage. He defeats the last Delhi Sultan at the Battle of Panipat in 1526 and establishes the Mughal dynasty.
But he wasn't a huge fan of India itself, was he?
No, he was an intellectual, but he kind of disdained the local culture. His son, Humayun, had a short, turbulent reign that ended when he tripped down his library stairs.
One of history's most embarrassing deaths.
It has to be up there.
And that brings his young son to the throne, Akbar the Great, often called the Ashoka of the Mughals.
A very fitting title. Akbar's real genius wasn't just military, though he was the first to really use cannons effectively. His genius was political integration.
He realized he couldn't rule without the support of the vast Hindu majority.
So he brings Hindu nobles into the highest levels of his administration. He makes alliances, marries a Hindu princess, and crucially, in 1564, he abolishes the jizya tax on non-Muslims and bans sati.
And his tolerance was genuine, not just political.
It seems so. He started these regular, respectful religious debates at his court with Hindus, Muslims, Jains, Christians, Zoroastrians. This tolerant, centralized administration was the key to the empire's long-term survival.
And the Mughal court was also a place where powerful women could wield real influence.
Absolutely. You have to talk about Nur Jahan, the wife of Emperor Jahangir. She was a brilliant politician. She held the royal seal, made appointments. She was a true power behind the throne.
A rare position for a woman in the Islamic world at that time.
Incredibly rare.
And then, of course, the most iconic symbol of the era, the Taj Mahal.
Commissioned by Shah Jahan for his favorite wife, Mumtaz Mahal, after she died giving birth to their fourth child.
It's the ultimate symbol of Mughal architecture and devotion.
It is, and we should probably mention that the popular myth about him cutting off the workers' hands so they could never build anything as beautiful again, there's no credible historical evidence. It was a monument of glory, not horror.
Now, while the Mughals are at their peak, a new force is arriving on the coast, the Europeans.
Starting with Vasco da Gama in 1498. At first, the Indians just saw the Portuguese as another group of traders.
But that changed pretty quickly.
It did once they realized the Europeans had superior naval tech. The Portuguese crushed an Egyptian fleet in 1509 and seized the port of Goa in 1510, giving them a permanent base they'd hold for 400.
Then the English arrived. The British East India Company is chartered in 1600.
After getting pushed out of Southeast Asia by the Dutch, they focus entirely on India. Their big break is the Battle of Surat, 1612, where they defeat the Portuguese.
Which impresses the Mughal emperor enough to let them set up a permanent base.
Exactly. And for the next 150 years, the EIC is mostly just a trading company, a useful, if unpredictable, wild card in local Indian politics.
But the Mughal Golden Age doesn't last. Emperor Aurangzeb takes the empire to its largest territorial extent, but his reign also starts its terminal decline.
And the reason is simple. He reversed Akbar's policy of tolerance. Starting in the 1670s, he brought back the jizya tax, set up Islamic morality police, and demolished several Hindu temples,
which alienated huge parts of the population.
It permanently alienated the Hindu rulers and nobles who were the back, and his constant, costly wars in the Deccan just drained the treasure.
This intolerance was felt very acutely by the Sikhs in the Punjab.
Yeah, Sikhism, founded by Guru Nanak, emphasized monotheism and justice. The Mughals saw their leaders as a threat.
And Aurangzeb's execution of the ninth Guru, Teg Bahadur, was the break.
It was a watershed moment. It transformed the Sikh community into a militant force. A rebellion broke out that ensured the Sikhs would never submit to Mughal authority again.
So with the central authority decaying, the empire starts to break apart.
Independent states pop up. Hyderabad, Awadh. Delhi is sacked by invaders from Persia, then Afghanistan.
And who fills this power vacuum?
The Marathas, a confederacy, not a centralized empire, that explodes out of the Deccan. By 1757, they've captured Delhi and become the single largest power in India.
But their expansion is stopped, just as dramatically as it began.
At the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761, A massive battle against the Afghans. The Marathas suffer a devastating defeat. It halts their expansion, and critically, it gives the British East India Company the time and space.
Okay, so by the mid-18th century, the British EIC is consolidating its power in its trading hubs, Madras, Bombay, Kolkata.
And their rivalry with the French really accelerates their rise. The Carnatic Wars basically end French power,
which leaves the British free to focus on territorial control. And the pivotal event, the real start of British rule, is the Battle of Plassey in 1757.
It all starts when the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj Uddaula, attacks the British Fort William in Kolkata.
And that leads to the horrific Black Hole of Calcutta incident.
Right, where captured British soldiers are imprisoned in a tiny airless cell. The British use that as powerful propaganda to justify retaliation.
But the EIC's victory at Plassey wasn't really won on the battlefield.
Not at all. It was won through treachery. The British commander, Robert Clive, made a secret deal with one of the Nawab's generals, Mir Jafar, who pulled his troops out at the critical moment.
A cheap, decisive victory.
And one that they cemented in 1765. The defeated Mughal emperor grants the EIC, the Diwani, the right to collect all taxes from Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa.
Which makes a private trading company the de facto ruler of a huge, wealthy territory.
Now you enter the era of company rule, which is just defined by ruthless economic extraction. They forced farmers to stop growing food and start growing cash crops like opium and Ind for British profit.
And that policy, combined with a drought, leads directly to the Bengal famine of 1769.
A monumental catastrophe. The EIC was totally unprepared and unwilling to deal with it. Estimates suggest around 1 million starved. It proved the company was unfit to govern.
The British Parliament tries to impose some order, but the real shift is this new, openly racist attitude.
Formalized in the Cornwallis Code of 1790, it officially excluded Indians from high office based on the explicit belief that they were inherently immoral and untrustworthy.
And meanwhile, the company is using its army of 300,000 native soldiers, the sepoy, to conquer the rest of India.
A relentless conquest. They defeat Tipu Sultan of Mysore, they absorb the Maratha Confederacy, and finally, powerful empire.
They even use legal tricks like the doctrine of lapse to annex states without a male heir.
All of this resentment, this hostility, just builds and builds until it finally explodes in 1857.
The Great Rebellion, or the Sepoy Mutiny.
The trigger was the rumor that new ammunition cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat, an intentional defilement of both Hindu and Muslim beliefs.
The sepoys rise up, massacre Europeans, and the rebellion spreads like wildfire.
It was widespread but not universal. The Sikhs and Pashtuns, for example, sided with the British. The suppression was incredibly brutal. Maybe 800,000 died.
And the result is the end of both the Mughal Empire and the East India Company.
Exactly. The British Crown takes direct control in 1858, beginning the era of the British Raj. But the rebellion proved that Indians could unite to force change, and that idea fueled the drive for independence.
So the seeds of self-rule are planted, watered by economic exploitation and cultural alienation. The British build railroads, yes, but to take resources out of India.
Right. And the only path to power for an Indian was to become less Indian, to adopt English education, English habit. But this backfired because it created an elite who could use the tools of Western political thought to challenge British rule.
Which leads to the Indian National Congress, founded 5.
It grows incredibly fast, becoming this formidable voice demanding rights and self-government.
But the Hindu-Muslim divide starts to deepen.
It does, often made worse by British policy. The violent cow protection movement in the late 19th century was a major flash. Many Muslims left the INC and formed the All India Muslim League in 1913.
The real turning point, though, seems to be the partition of Bengal in 1905.
A massive miscalculation by the British. Indians saw it as a deliberate divide and rule tactic, and it sparked the Swadesh.
The first mass movement based on economic non-cooperation, boycotting and burning foreign goods.
And it was so effective that the British were forced to reverse the partition. It was a huge victory.
After World War I, where 1.5 million Indians served, the demand for rights grew even louder. The British response was repression,
which led directly to the tragedy that solidified the independence, the Amritsar massacre in 1919.
General Dyer ordering his troops to open fire on thousands of unarmed festival-goers.
The death toll, anywhere from 379 to 1,500, horrified the world. Even Churchill called it monstrous. It turned millions of previously loyal Indians against the Raj for good.
And this is the moment that Mahatma Gandhi returns from South Africa.
Bringing his philosophy of satyagraha, nonviolent resistance, It was transformative because it weaponized morality. It seized the high ground.
And his most iconic act was the Salt March in 1930.
A 240-mile walk to defy the British salt tax. The non-cooperation movement that followed saw 60,000 people arrested. It proved that mass nonviolent dissent could make India ungovernable.
By this point, the idea of partition is gaining ground, and Nehru is leading Congress to demand Purna Swaraj full independence.
World War II just complicates everything. Congress launches the Quit India movement, while some, like Subhas Chandra Bose, controversially try to ally with the Axis powers.
And the war brings another disaster, the 1943 Bengal famine.
Another million people starved to death due to British policy. It was the final moral and administrative bankruptcy of the Raj.
So by 1947, the British announced their lead, and despite Gandhi's pleas, partition is seen as the only way to avoid a full-scale civil war.
The border was finalized only days before independence, an administrative nightmare. About 15 million people suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of
triggering one of the largest and most violent mass migrations in human history.
The violence was horrific. Mob killings, massacres, over 1 million people died from violence.
And this immediately sparks the first Indo-Pakistani war over Kashmir.
When the Hindu Maharaja of Muslim-majority Kashmir acceded to India for military aid against a rebellion, that war created the contested, militarized line of control that still exists today.
And in the middle of all this chaos, Gandhi is assassinated
by a Hindu radical for trying to heal the religious divide. Devastating blow, but he lived just long enough to see the birth of the independent nation he fought for.
Okay, so the new Republic of India is born with its 1950 constitution, led by Jawaharlal Nehru.
And that constitution establishes India as a secular democracy, with universal suffrage and protections for all Sinling.
Nehru's vision was socialist modernization, 5-year plans, heavy industry, and a non-aligned foreign policy during the Cold War.
He also pushed for vital social reforms, ending caste restrictions on marriage, and crucially, establishing the elite Indian Institutes of Technology, the I,
to produce a generation of world-class.
But it wasn't all peaceful. India annexed Portuguese Goa in 1916 and then lost a border war with China in 1992.
After Nehru, his daughter, Indira Gandhi, comes to power, establishing the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty.
And she was very shrewd, sometimes ruthlessly presided over the Green Revolution, self-sufficient in food, and she made India a nuclear power.
Her biggest military success was the 1971 Bangladesh.
A massive geopolitical victory. She intervened against West Pakistan's genocide of Bengalis and secured Bangladesh's independence, crippling the Pakistani military in the process.
But her rule was deeply controversial.
Very. She was found guilty of election fraud in 1975 and responded by declaring a 2-year state of emergency.
Basically, dictatorial rule, censorship, jailing opponents.
A very dangerous precedent for India's young democracy. Her biggest crisis, though, came in Punjab with Sikh separatists. She ordered Operation Blue Star in 1984, sending the army into the sacred Golden Temple,
which led directly to her assassination by her 2 Sikh bodyguards later that year.
Her son, Rajiv, took over, but was also assassinated in 1991, ending the dynasty's rule.
And that political turmoil coincides with a huge economic crisis in 1991.
India's foreign reserves nearly ran out, forcing a massive shift away from state-controlled socialism toward economic liberalization.
Opening up to foreign investment, cutting regulations.
And the result was meteoric growth. GDP rose 50% in a decade. India's tech and service sectors exploded, producing world-class engineers who became famous in Silicon Valley.
But prosperity didn't end the rivalry with Pakistan. The Kargil War in 1999 was a scary reminder that both countries now had nuclear weapons.
And modern India still faces huge challenge. Its population overtook China's in 2024. It deals with climate disasters, terrorism, and homegrown insurgency.
But it's also a rising technological power, a successful moon landing in 2023, which brings us to the current era, under Narendra Modi and the BJP,
who formed the first majority government in 30 years back in 2014. Economically, they've embraced globalism, and India overtook the UK as the world's 5th largest economy in 2022.
But Modi's leadership is really defined by its social ideology, the revival of Hindutva.
Hindu cultural national. It emphasizes India's Hindu heritage, which resonates with a large part of the majority population. But critics argue it endangers minorities like Muslims and Sikhs and threatens India's secular constitution.
And you can see this tension perfectly synthesized in the inauguration of the Ram Temple in Ayodhya in 2024.
Perfectly. The temple was built on the site of a mosque that was destroyed by Hindu radicals in 1992. Modi's personal involvement mirrors the ancient tradition of emperors patronizing temples to legitimize their power.
But the history of the site, the destruction of the mosque, it leaves this shadow of religious division and past conflict hanging over the whole thing.
It absolutely encapsulates the enduring dilemma of India's history, the collision of cultures, and the tension between celebrating one heritage and including all.
So after this incredible journey, What's the takeaway? We've seen India as a pioneer with the IRVC and the concept of zero, a crucible of global religions, a prize for conquerors from the Mughals to the British, and a nation forged in resistance and the agony of partition.
And that entire history provides the context for its future. India today is more unified, more populous, wealthier, and more powerful than at any point. Many analysts predict major global superpower by.
But the question remains, and this is the thought we want to leave you with. Given India's long history, where the failure to manage its profound diversity led to the collapse of every major empire, from the Mauryans and Guptas to the Mughals and the British Raj, will modern India, in its pursuit of strength and growth, finally succeed where all the others fail?
Or will the new prioritization of one dominant heritage repeat the very historical patterns that toppled all those who came before? It is the tension between the weight of centuries and the immense potential of the future that defines.
A powerful and necessary note to end on. Thank you for diving deep with us.